When she broke into my apartment that stormy night, I thought she was trouble. I never imagined she'd become my salvation, or that saving her would save myself. David sat in his small apartment, papers scattered across the old wooden table. Red ink marks covered student essays as he worked late into the evening. The substitute teaching job wasn't his dream career, but it paid the bills and kept him busy. Outside, heavy rain tapped against his windows like tiny fingers demanding attention. 3 months had passed since he moved into this place above the old bookstore. Mrs. Park, his kind landlord, had given him a good deal on the rent. The apartment was simple but cozy. 1 bedroom, a small kitchen, and a living room that doubled as his office. After his divorce, this quiet space felt like a fresh start. The divorce had been rough. 2 years of fighting over everything from furniture to bank accounts. When it finally ended, David felt empty, but relieved. His ex-wife got the house, the car, and most of their friends. He got his freedom and a chance to rebuild his life from scratch. Tonight felt peaceful. He had graded half the essays and was thinking about making some tea when he heard something strange. Footsteps on the metal stairs outside his door. Heavy, confident steps that didn't match Mrs. Park's gentle shuffle. David paused, pen in hand. He lived on the 2nd floor and the stairs led only to his apartment. Who could be coming up at this hour? It was past 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night. The bookstore below had been closed for hours. The footsteps stopped right outside his door. David waited for a knock, but none came. Instead, he heard the door handle turn slowly. His heart jumped. He was sure he had locked it. The door opened without permission. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of rain and wet pavement. In walked a woman he recognized immediately but hadn't seen in over a year. It was Alex, his ex-wife's younger sister. She was soaking wet from the storm. Her dark hair stuck to her face and neck. Water dripped from her jacket onto his floor, creating small puddles around her feet. But despite being drenched, she carried herself like she owned the place. David stared at her, his mouth slightly open. Alex had always been the bold one in the family. While his ex-wife was careful and planned everything, Alex jumped into situations without thinking. She spoke her mind, took what she wanted, and never apologized for being herself. "I need somewhere to stay," Alex said simply. Her voice was calm, matter-of-fact. She spoke like someone ordering coffee, not like someone asking for a huge favor. David blinked several times, trying to process what was happening. "Alex, how did you find me? How did you get in?" "I locked that door." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small metal tool. "Picked it, took me about 30 seconds. She said this casually, as if lockpicking was a normal skill everyone possessed. "You can't just break into my apartment," David protested, standing up from his chair. His papers rustled as he moved, some falling to the floor. Alex ignored his complaint. She began removing her wet jacket, letting it drop carelessly onto his wooden floor. Next came her sweater, revealing a simple shirt underneath. She wrung out her long hair, sending more water drops across his living room. "Nice place," she said, looking around like she was considering buying it. "Small, but it has character. Better than that fancy house you shared with my sister." David felt his cheeks heat up. The mention of his ex-wife brought back memories he'd been trying to forget. "Alex, you can't stay here. This is crazy. What would people think? What would your sister think?" Alex laughed, a sound both musical and slightly mocking. "My sister doesn't care what I do anymore. Besides, who's going to tell her? You?" She walked around his small living room, examining his books and papers like she was touring a museum. Her confidence was unsettling. Most people would ask permission before touching someone's belongings. Alex picked up his coffee mug, sniffed it, and made a face. "You still drink that cheap instant coffee? No wonder you look tired all the time." "I look tired because I work 2 jobs and live on 4 hours of sleep," David replied. He was getting frustrated but also confused. Why was Alex here? What did she want from him? Alex moved to his small kitchen and opened the refrigerator without asking. She examined the contents with disappointment. Leftover pizza, energy drinks, and what looks like very old cheese. "David, you're living like a college student." "I'm managing just fine," he said defensively. "Alex, seriously, what's going on? Why are you here?" She closed the refrigerator and turned to face him. For a moment, her confident mask slipped. He saw something in her eyes that looked almost vulnerable, but it disappeared quickly, replaced by that familiar smirk. I told you, I need somewhere to stay. Just for a few days while I figure things out. Figure what out? And why my place? Don't you have friends? Other family? Alex's smirk grew wider. You owe me a favor, remember? David's stomach dropped. He knew exactly what she was talking about. 3 years ago, during his bachelor party, he had made a mistake. Nothing serious, but something that would have upset his future wife if she'd found out. Alex had been there and had promised to keep his secret. She never mentioned it again, and he'd hoped she'd forgotten. That was years ago, he said quietly. Favors don't have expiration dates, Alex replied. She walked past him, close enough that he caught a hint of her perfume mixed with the smell of rain. Besides, you look like you could use some company. This place feels lonely. David wanted to argue, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the way she'd said the word lonely. Maybe it was because she was right. His apartment was quiet most of the time. Too quiet. Alex seemed to sense his hesitation. She sat down on his couch without invitation, curling her legs under her like she lived there. I promise I won't be any trouble. You won't even know I'm here. David looked at her sitting on his furniture, water still dripping from her hair onto his cushions. Everything about the situation screamed trouble. Alex had never been predictable. She did what she wanted, when she wanted, without caring about consequences. But as he watched her settle into his space with such ease, he realized something unexpected. For the first time in months, his apartment didn't feel empty. The silence that usually surrounded him had been broken by another person's presence. Just a few days, he asked. Alex's smirk softened into something that might have been a real smile. Just a few days. David sighed and began picking up his fallen papers. He had a feeling his quiet, predictable life was about to become much more complicated. But as he glanced at Alex making herself comfortable on his couch, he wasn't entirely sure that was a bad thing. The rain continued to fall outside, and David wondered what tomorrow would bring. David woke up the next morning to the smell of real coffee. Not the instant powder he usually mixed with hot water, but actual brewed coffee that filled his small apartment with a rich aroma. He stumbled out of his bedroom, rubbing his eyes, wondering if he was still dreaming. Alex stood in his kitchen, completely at home. She had found his old coffee maker buried in a cabinet and somehow made it work. Steam rose from 2 mugs on the counter. She wore one of his oversized shirts like a dress, her legs bare underneath. Her hair was still damp from a shower. Morning. Sleepyhead, she said without turning around. I made breakfast. David looked at his kitchen table. Somehow she had transformed his usual morning routine. Instead of grabbing an energy bar on his way out, he saw scrambled eggs, toast, and fresh fruit arranged on actual plates. His mismatched dishes looked better than they ever had. Where did all this food come from? He asked, genuinely confused. His refrigerator had been nearly empty yesterday. I went shopping early. There's a grocery store 3 blocks away. Nice owner, speaks 3 languages. We had a lovely chat about the neighborhood. David stared at her. You went shopping? With what money? Alex poured coffee into both mugs and handed him one. I have some savings. Don't worry about it. The coffee was perfect. Rich, strong, exactly how he liked it, but never managed to make himself. David sat down at his own table, feeling like a guest in his own home. Alex, we need to talk about boundaries, he started. Boundaries are overrated, she interrupted, sitting across from him. Try the eggs. I added herbs from that little plant on your windowsill. David had forgotten he even had that herb plant. His ex-wife had left it behind, and he'd been keeping it alive without really paying attention to it. Somehow Alex had noticed it and put it to good use. The next few days followed a similar pattern. David would come home from teaching to find his apartment subtly changed. His books were reorganized by color instead of alphabetically. His kitchen cabinets had been rearranged for better efficiency. His bathroom had new towels and soap that actually smelled good. Each change was small, but noticeable. Alex never asked permission. She simply saw something that could be improved and improved it. When David protested, she would give him that same knowing smile and change the subject. "You don't have to do all this," he told her on Thursday evening. He'd come home to find his living room furniture rearranged to create better flow and lighting. "I'm not doing it for you," Alex replied. She was folding his laundry, something he usually let pile up for weeks. "I'm doing it because I live here too, temporarily. But it's my apartment, and it's my temporary home. If I'm going to stay somewhere, it might as well be comfortable." David wanted to argue, but he had to admit his apartment had never looked better or felt more welcoming. The changes Alex made weren't just practical. They created an atmosphere of warmth he hadn't realized was missing. The most unsettling part wasn't how she changed his space. It was how she seemed to understand him without asking questions. On Tuesday, he came home exhausted after dealing with difficult students all day. Alex took one look at his face and ordered Chinese food from his favorite restaurant. Food he'd never mentioned liking. "How did you know about Wong's Kitchen?" he asked as they shared noodles from paper containers. "You had their menu stuck to your refrigerator with a magnet. Plus, you get this specific look when you're craving comfort food." "What look?" "Like a lost puppy who needs feeding." David laughed, despite himself. "I don't look like a lost puppy." "You absolutely do. It's actually kind of sweet." On Wednesday night, David couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, his mind racing with work stress and life worries. Around midnight, he heard soft footsteps in the kitchen. The kettle whistled quietly, and soon Alex appeared with 2 cups of chamomile tea. "Thought you might need this," she said, handing him a steaming mug. She didn't ask what was wrong or try to fix his problems. She simply sat in the corner chair with her own tea, reading a book by lamplight. Her quiet presence was oddly comforting. Within an hour, David felt calm enough to fall asleep. By Friday, David realized his routine had completely changed. He woke up to fresh coffee and actual breakfast. He came home to a clean apartment and dinner that wasn't microwaved leftovers. His clothes were always clean and properly folded. His space felt alive in a way it hadn't since before his divorce. But the strangest part was how natural it all felt. Alex moved through his apartment like she belonged there. She knew where everything was, remembered his preferences, and anticipated his needs before he recognized them himself. "This was supposed to be temporary," David said Friday evening as they watched a movie on his newly organized entertainment center. "It still is," Alex replied, not taking her eyes off the screen. "But you've basically moved in completely. I've made myself comfortable. There's a difference." David looked around his transformed living space. Every corner showed Alex's influence. New cushions on the couch, better lighting, plants that were actually thriving, books arranged by color creating an artistic display. "What happens when you leave?" he asked quietly. For the first time since she'd arrived, Alex seemed uncertain. Her confidence wavered slightly. "I guess you'll have to learn to make your own coffee again, and do my own laundry, and remember to buy groceries, and figure out how to make this place feel warm instead of empty." Alex finally looked at him. Something passed between them in that moment, an acknowledgement that their arrangement had become more complicated than either had expected. "Maybe you won't have to," she said softly. "What do you mean?" "Maybe I won't leave as soon as I planned." David felt his heart skip slightly. The idea of Alex staying longer both thrilled and terrified him. She had turned his quiet, predictable life upside down in the best possible way, but he still didn't understand why she was really here or what she ultimately wanted. "Alex, why did you really come here?" he asked. Her mask of confidence slipped again, just for a moment. She looked vulnerable, almost fragile. But then she smiled and stood up from the couch. "Because sometimes people need each other, even when they don't realize it." She headed toward the bathroom, leaving David alone with his thoughts and the lingering scent of her perfume. Outside, the city continued its evening rhythm. But inside his transformed apartment, David sat wondering how one person could change everything so quickly and completely. 2 weeks into Alex's stay, David's life had settled into a comfortable rhythm he'd never experienced before. His apartment felt like a real home instead of just a place to sleep. Alex had a way of making ordinary moments feel special. Simple. Dinners became conversations that lasted hours. Watching movies became cozy evenings that made him forget about his troubles. But David was starting to notice small things that didn't add up. Alex never talked about her job or why she had so much free time. She avoided phone calls when he was around, often stepping outside or into the bathroom when her phone rang. Sometimes late at night he heard her pacing in the living room, having quiet conversations he couldn't quite understand. The first real clue came on a Saturday morning. David woke up early and found Alex already awake, sitting by the window, with a cup of coffee. She was staring out at the street below with an expression he'd never seen before. She looked worried, almost frightened. "Everything okay?" he asked, joining her with his own coffee. Alex quickly changed her expression back to her usual confident smile. "Of course, just enjoying the morning view." But David had seen the fear in her eyes. It was real and raw, completely different from the bold woman who had walked into his apartment 2 weeks ago. That evening, Alex's phone rang during dinner. She glanced at the caller ID and her face went pale. "I need to take this," she said, grabbing her phone and heading for his bedroom. David tried to respect her privacy, but his apartment was small. Even with the bedroom door closed, he could hear parts of her conversation. Her voice was different. Instead of the confident tone she always used with him, she sounded small and scared. "I told you I need more time," he heard her say. "Please just give me another week, I'm working on it." There was a long pause. Then Alex's voice again, quieter but more desperate. "You don't understand. I can't get that kind of money right now. My situation has changed." Another pause. David heard Alex say something about payments and deadlines. Her voice was shaking. "Don't threaten me," she said, trying to sound brave but failing. "I said I'll pay you back. And I will." The call ended abruptly. David heard Alex breathing heavily in the bedroom. After a few minutes, she came back out, trying to act normal. "Sorry about that," she said, sitting back down at the dinner table. "Work stuff." "What kind of work do you do?" David asked gently. "Different things. Freelance projects, nothing too exciting." David wanted to push for more information, but Alex quickly changed the subject. She started talking about a movie she wanted to watch, but her hands were shaking slightly as she reached for her water glass. 3 nights later, David woke up around 2 in the morning. He could hear Alex in the living room talking on the phone again. This time her voice was clearer and he could make out more of the conversation. "I understand you're losing patience," Alex was saying, "but threatening me won't make money appear out of nowhere." David quietly got out of bed and moved closer to his bedroom door. He felt guilty for listening, but something in Alex's tone worried him deeply. "My boyfriend had nothing to do with this," Alex continued. "Leave him out of it. This is between you and me." "Boyfriend?" David's heart jumped. Was she talking about him? They weren't dating, but to the outside world, they probably looked like a couple living together. "I made a mistake trusting him with the money," Alex said. "I know that now, but I can't undo what happened. I can only promise to pay you back." Alex was quiet for a long time, presumably listening to whoever was on the other end. Then David heard her voice break slightly. "Please don't hurt anyone. I'll figure something out, I promise." The call ended, and David heard Alex crying softly. Real tears, not the controlled emotion she usually showed him. He wanted to go comfort her, but he didn't want her to know he'd been listening. The next morning, Alex seemed different. The confident mask was still there, but David could see cracks in it. She made breakfast as usual, but her hands shook slightly as she poured coffee. She jumped every time her phone made a sound. "Alex," David said carefully, "if you're in some kind of trouble, you can tell me. Maybe I can help." She looked at him with surprise, then something like hope, then quickly back to her usual guarded expression. "I don't know what you mean," she said. "I'm fine. Everything's fine." But everything wasn't fine. That afternoon, while Alex was out grocery shopping, her phone rang on the kitchen counter. She'd forgotten it. something that never happened. Alex was always careful with her phone. David stared at the ringing device. The caller ID showed just a number, no name. He didn't answer it, but when it stopped ringing, a text message appeared on the locked screen. "Time's running out. We know where you're staying now." David's blood went cold. Someone was threatening Alex, and they knew about his apartment. Whatever trouble she was in, it was following her here. Following her to him. When Alex returned with groceries, David was waiting with her phone. "You got a text," he said simply. Alex looked at the phone, read the message, and all the color drained from her face. For the first time since she'd arrived, her confidence completely crumbled. She sank into a chair like her legs couldn't hold her anymore. "They found me," she whispered. "Who found you?" "Alex, what's going on?" She looked up at him with tears in her eyes. The strong, bold woman who had walked into his apartment was gone. In her place was someone vulnerable and terrified. "I owe money to some very bad people," she said quietly. "A lot of money. And they're getting tired of waiting for me to pay them back." David sat down across from her. "How much money?" $15,000. David felt his stomach drop. That was more money than he made in 6 months of substitute teaching. "What happened? How did you end up owing so much?" Alex wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I was dating someone last year. He seemed perfect, charming, successful, generous. He said he loved me and wanted to help me start my own business." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "He asked me to invest in what he called a sure thing. Said we'd double our money in 3 months. I gave him everything I had saved, plus money I borrowed from some people he knew." David already knew where this story was going. "He disappeared with all of it," Alex continued. "The investment was fake. The people I borrowed from weren't banks or legitimate lenders. They were the kind of people who break kneecaps when they don't get paid back." "Why didn't you go to the police?" "Because I willingly gave him the money, and because the people I borrowed from don't exactly file police reports. They handle things their own way." David reached across the table and took her hand. It was cold and trembling. "So you came here to hide." "I came here because you're the only person I know who's decent enough to help me without asking too many questions, and stupid enough to let me stay without knowing the whole truth." Despite everything, David almost smiled. "Thanks for the compliment." "I'm sorry," Alex said, fresh tears falling. "I never meant to put you in danger. I thought I could figure something out before they found me. I thought I had more time." David squeezed her hand. "We'll figure something out together." "We?" "David, these aren't people you want to mess with. You should ask me to leave right now." David looked at this woman, who had walked into his life and turned everything upside down. She had lied to him, used him, and put him in potential danger. But she had also made him feel less alone than he had in years. She had turned his empty apartment into a home, and his boring routine into something worth looking forward to. "I'm not asking you to leave," he said firmly. "You should, but I'm not." Alex stared at him in amazement. "Why not?" David thought about it for a moment. "Because everyone deserves someone who will stand by them when things get bad. And because I think you'd do the same for me." For the first time since her phone call, Alex smiled. It was small and shaky, but real. "You have no idea what you're getting yourself into," she said. "Then you'd better explain it to me so we can figure out what to do next." Outside, the afternoon sun was setting, casting long shadows across their small apartment. Inside, 2 people who barely knew each other were about to face something dangerous together. David had no idea if they could solve Alex's problem, but he knew he wasn't going to abandon her to face it alone. The next morning brought trouble in the worst possible way. David was helping Mrs. Park organize some books in the store downstairs when 2 men in expensive suits walked in. They didn't look like the usual customers who browsed through romance novels and local history books. "We're looking for someone," the taller man said. His voice was polite, but there was something cold underneath. "Young woman, dark hair, goes by Alex. We heard she might be staying around here." Mrs. Park looked confused, which wasn't hard since English wasn't her first language. "Many people come to store. I don't keep track of everyone. David felt his heart racing, but he tried to act normal. He continued stacking books while listening to every word. She owes our boss some money, the second man explained. We just want to have a friendly conversation with her. There was nothing friendly about the way he said it. David had never met people like this before, but he'd seen enough movies to know they weren't here for a polite chat. Mrs. Park shook her head honestly. Sorry, I don't know this person. Maybe try next block? The men exchanged looks. They didn't believe her, but they also couldn't prove she was lying. If you see her, the tall man said, placing a business card on the counter, give us a call. There might be something in it for you. After they left, David and Mrs. Park stood in silence for a moment. The older woman looked worried. David, you know this girl they're looking for? She asked quietly. David nodded. There was no point lying to Mrs. Park. She was sharp and kind, and she'd been good to him. She's in trouble, he said. Bad trouble, by the look of those men. You be careful. David went upstairs to find Alex pacing the apartment like a caged animal. She'd seen the men from the window. They found me, she said, her voice tight with fear. I have to leave. Right now. She was already throwing her few belongings into a backpack. Her hands shook as she folded clothes. Wait, David said. Don't panic. Let's think about this. Think about what? They know where I am. It's over. Running again won't solve anything. You'll just be looking over your shoulder forever. Alex stopped packing and stared at him. What else can I do? I don't have $15,000. I can't make money appear out of thin air. David had been thinking about this since last night. Before his divorce, he'd worked as a financial advisor. He knew about loans, investments, and legal options. More importantly, he knew about consumer protection laws. Tell me exactly how this loan happened, he said. Every detail. Alex looked frustrated. David, this isn't the time for financial planning. Just trust me. How did you meet these people? What paperwork did you sign? Reluctantly, Alex sat down and explained the whole situation. Her ex-boyfriend had introduced her to someone who claimed to run a private lending business. They'd given her cash with a verbal agreement to pay back double the amount in 6 months. No written contract? David asked. Just a handwritten note saying I owed the money. David felt a spark of hope. Do you still have it? Alex dug through her purse and found a crumpled piece of paper. David read it carefully. The terms were outrageous. The interest rate was illegal in most states. Alex, this isn't a legitimate loan. This is predatory lending and it's against the law. That doesn't matter to people who break legs for a living. But it matters to the authorities. And it gives us leverage. David explained his idea. Instead of running, they would face the problem head-on. He knew a lawyer from his previous job who specialized in financial crimes. They could file complaints with the State Banking Commission and potentially with law enforcement. You want to fight them legally? Alex asked. David, these people don't care about laws. Maybe not, but they do care about attention from police and government agencies. Bad publicity can shut down their operations. Alex looked skeptical, but David could see she was considering it. Running had gotten her nowhere. Maybe it was time to try something different. That afternoon, David called his old colleague James, who now worked as a lawyer specializing in consumer protection. After explaining the situation, James agreed to meet them that evening at the bookstore. This could actually work, James said after reviewing Alex's paperwork. The interest rate alone is criminal. If we can prove they're running an illegal lending operation, we can get law enforcement involved. But what about the immediate threat? Alex asked. They're not going to wait for a court case. That's where we get creative, James replied. We arrange a meeting and record them making threats. With evidence of illegal lending and criminal intimidation, we can get them arrested. The plan was risky but had potential. They would set up a meeting at the bookstore after hours. James would hide nearby with recording equipment, while David and Alex confronted the men. If everything went right, they'd have enough evidence to put the loan sharks out of business. What if everything goes wrong? Alex asked. Then we run, David said simply. But at least we'll have tried. 2 days later, Alex called the number from the business card. She arranged to meet the men at the bookstore that evening to discuss payment options. David spent the day setting up the meeting space. He moved furniture to create better acoustics for recording and made sure James had a clear view from his hiding spot in the history section. Alex was nervous but determined. "I can't believe I'm doing this instead of running away." "You're braver than you think," David told her. "Or stupider. Sometimes there's not much difference." That evening, the two men arrived exactly on time. They looked around the cozy bookstore with amusement, like they found the setting ridiculous. "So," the tall one said, "you ready to pay what you owe?" "I want to discuss the terms," Alex replied, her voice steadier than David expected. "The interest rate seems excessive." The shorter man laughed. "Interest rate? Lady, you borrowed from us, not a bank. You pay what we say you pay." "Actually," David spoke up, "charging interest over 24% annually is illegal in this state." Both men turned to look at him like they'd just noticed he existed. "Who's this?" the tall one asked Alex. "My friend, he knows about financial law." The men exchanged amused looks. "Financial law doesn't apply to private agreements," the shorter one said. "It does when you're operating an unlicensed lending business," David replied. "Which is a felony." The mood in the room shifted. The men's casual confidence turned into something harder. "You need to be very careful what you're saying," the tall man warned. "Are you threatening me?" David asked clearly, hoping James was getting everything on tape. "I'm giving you advice. Mind your own business, or we'll make it our business to mind you." "That sounds like a threat," Alex said loudly. "Smart girl," the shorter man said. "Now let's talk about your payment schedule." For the next 10 minutes, the men made increasingly clear threats about what would happen if Alex didn't pay. They mentioned previous clients who had failed to pay and the unpleasant consequences they'd faced. Finally, David stood up. "I think we've heard enough." He raised his voice slightly. "James, did you get all that?" From behind the history shelves, James emerged with recording equipment and his phone already dialing. The loan sharks realized they'd been set up, but it was too late. Within minutes, police sirens could be heard approaching. "You have no idea what you've done," the tall man said angrily. "We've documented criminal threats and illegal lending practices," James replied calmly. "I'd say we've done exactly what we intended." As police officers entered the bookstore, David looked at Alex. She was shaking, but not from fear this time. She looked amazed that their plan had actually worked. The rest of the evening was spent giving statements to police and filing formal complaints. James explained that with the recorded threats and evidence of illegal lending, they had a strong case. "What happens now?" Alex asked as they finally headed upstairs to David's apartment. "Now we wait and see if this is really over," David replied. "And if it's not?" David took her hand. "Then we figure out the next step together." For the first time in weeks, Alex smiled without worry behind it. They had faced the problem instead of running from it, and somehow, they had won. 3 months later, David's life looked completely different, but in ways he could never have imagined. The bookstore below his apartment had become busier thanks to Alex's ideas for community events and better marketing. She had turned out to have a natural talent for business that she'd never had the chance to explore. "We sold 12 books yesterday," Alex announced, coming upstairs with the day's receipts. "That's more than Mrs. Park usually sold in a week." David looked up from the papers he was grading. His substitute teaching job was still part-time, but now it felt like a choice rather than something he was stuck with. Having Alex as a partner in the bookstore gave him options he'd never had before. "The book club meeting brought in several new customers," Alex continued, settling beside him on the couch. "Mrs. Park wants to make it a weekly thing." The book club had been Alex's idea. She'd convinced Mrs. Park to let them use the store space for evening discussions about popular novels. It brought in people who'd never visited the store before, many of whom ended up buying books or browsing the other sections. "You're turning into quite the businesswoman," David said. Alex smiled, but there was something different about it now. Her smiles had become more genuine over the past few months. The constant worry and fear that had shadowed her face were gone, replaced by a confidence that felt real instead of forced. "I never thought I was good at anything practical," she said. "My sister always said I was too impulsive to handle responsibility." "Your sister was wrong about a lot of things." The legal case against the loan sharks had been resolved quickly. With the recorded threats and evidence of illegal lending practices, the men had accepted plea bargains rather than risk trial. Alex's debt had been legally erased and the lending operation had been shut down completely. But the real changes in their relationship had happened more gradually. The crisis had forced them to trust each other, but building something lasting had taken time and patience. "David," Alex said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Sure. That first night when I showed up here, did you know you'd let me stay?" David thought about it. "Honestly? No. I was terrified of you." "Terrified? Why?" "Because you walked in like you owned the place. Like you knew something about me that I didn't know about myself." Alex laughed. "I was just trying not to fall apart in front of you. I'd been walking around in the rain for 2 hours trying to work up the courage to knock on your door. You picked my lock, because I was afraid if I knocked you'd say no, before I could explain." David realized how much they'd both changed since that night. Alex no longer needed to pretend to be completely confident, and he no longer needed to hide from emotional complications. "What did you think would happen between us?" he asked. "I thought you'd let me stay a few days. I'd figure out my money problems, and then I'd disappear from your life again. I never expected—" "What?" "I never expected to want to stay." The admission hung between them. They'd been dancing around their feelings for weeks, both afraid to name what was happening. "When did you know?" David asked softly. "Know what?" "That you wanted this to be permanent." Alex was quiet for a moment, considering. "Remember that night you couldn't sleep and I made tea?" David nodded. "You fell asleep in your chair and I watched you for about an hour. You looked so peaceful. And I realized that I'd never felt that safe with anyone before. Not just physically safe, but emotionally safe. Like I could be myself without pretending or performing." "And when did you know you loved me?" The question surprised them both. David hadn't planned to ask it so directly. Alex looked at him with those dark eyes that had captivated him from the first night. "When you chose to help me instead of asking me to leave. When you faced those men with me even though you were scared. When you proved that you'd rather be in danger with me than safe without me. And now? Now I know that what I felt for you before my sister's marriage wasn't just attraction or curiosity. I was half in love with you for years, but I convinced myself it was just fantasy." David reached for her hand. "It wasn't fantasy." "No, it wasn't." The kiss that followed was different from the tentative, uncertain ones they'd shared in recent weeks. This one carried the weight of honesty and the promise of a real future together. "So what happens now?" Alex asked when they broke apart. "Now we figure out how to build a life together," David said. "Not because you need somewhere to stay, or because I need someone to make my apartment feel less empty, but because we choose each other. Are you sure you can handle being with someone who broke into your apartment and reorganized your entire life without permission? Are you sure you can handle being with someone who grades papers at the kitchen table and drinks terrible instant coffee? I've been training you to drink better coffee for months, and it's been working." Alex curled up against him on the couch. "Mrs. Park asked if we wanted to take over more responsibility for the store, maybe eventually buy it from her when she retires. What do you think?" "I think we could make it into something special, a real community gathering place. Maybe add a small cafe section, host more events, create a space where people feel welcome." David could picture it. The dusty old bookstore transformed into a warm, inviting place where people came not just to buy books but to connect with each other. "It would be a lot of work," he said. "The best things usually are. And we'd be business partners as well as—" "As well as what?" Alex asked with a teasing smile. "As well as whatever we're becoming. I think the word you're looking for is couple. Is that what we are? Unless you have a better word." David thought about it. 6 months ago, he'd been a divorced man living alone above a failing bookstore, teaching other people's classes and eating microwaved dinners. Now he was part of a team, building something meaningful with someone who understood him better than he understood himself. Partners, he said finally. In everything, partners, Alex agreed. That night, as they fell asleep in David's bed that had somehow become their bed, Alex traced lazy patterns on his chest. David? Thank you for not being afraid of me. Thank you for not being afraid of staying. Outside, the city continued its evening rhythm. Cars passed on the street below. People walked home from late dinners and the bookstore sat quietly, waiting for another day of new possibilities. Inside the small apartment, two people who had found each other in the middle of their separate crises slept peacefully, no longer worried about tomorrow because they knew they'd face it together. The next morning would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new adventures. But tonight, they were exactly where they belonged.